Nightingale Nora. That is what Dr. Caldwell said 47 minutes before the military convoy arrived at Riverside Community Hospital. The words echoed across 3 floors through the overhead speaker system at 11:43 p.m., his voice dripping with theatrical concern as he announced that our Florence Nightingale had once again exceeded protocol by restocking a crash cart with supplies that technically belonged in a medication lockup. The announcement wasn't a question. It wasn't even directed at Megan O'Brien. It was a performance, and the entire night shift was the audience. Megan stood in trauma bay 2, her hand steady as surgical steel, and she did not pause. Did not look up. Did not acknowledge that 17 nurses, 3 residents, and 1 respiratory therapist now knew exactly who he was talking about. She continued charting vitals on the previous patient, a 63-year-old construction worker with a fractured tibia, her penmanship precise and authoritative, each number recorded with the kind of meticulous attention that left no room for ambiguity. The fluorescent lights hummed their mechanical dirge above her head as she moved, and she knew Dr. Caldwell was watching from the nurse's station, waiting for something to break in her face. Some flicker of embarrassment. Some tremor of doubt. She had learned long ago that trembling was a choice. The night shift at Riverside Community moved with the rhythmic efficiency of blood through veins. Portland rain hammered the emergency bay windows like 1,000 impatient fists, and outside, the city slept while the broken and bleeding arrived in waves. Megan had been walking these corridors for 4 years now, for years since her medical discharge from Special Forces following the incident at Marjah, for years since shrapnel had redesigned her left leg and made her intimately familiar with chronic pain that she refused to discuss with anyone, least of all a therapist who would ask questions she had no intention of answering. In those 4 years, she had become the kind of nurse that other nurses noticed. Not because she was warm or personable or quick with reassurance. She was none of those things. She was noticed because she was correct. Every order double-checked. Every medication dose verified against the hospital formulary. Every patient chart a masterpiece of documentation so thorough that it could withstand any audit, any lawsuit, any question that might arise months or years later. She moved through the ER with the kind of calm that people rarely appreciated until they were dying and they needed someone whose hands did not shake and whose voice did not crack and who understood that emotions were a luxury available only to people who had the time for them. Her locker, stuffed in the cramped employee break room on the 2nd floor, held her spare scrubs and a pair of worn combat boots. The leather was cracked and faded, the laces wrapped around the ankles in a tight knot that she had learned to tie with one hand during her 2nd tour. The boots had walked through Helmand Province. They had walked through the chaos of convoy ambushes and medevac helicopters and the moment her femur shattered like dropped glass. Nobody at Riverside Community knew about those boots. Nobody needed to know. Dr. Caldwell, on the other hand, needed to know that his billing codes were about to be scrutinized. He knew that Megan knew. She could read it in the way his jaw clenched every time she approached the medication dispensary, the way his eye twitched slightly when she ran her finger down the supply inventory sheets and noted, with perfect administrative courtesy, that the quarterly order for Level 1 rapid infusers seemed unusually elevated for a hospital their size. 17 units ordered. 3 used. 14 sitting in storage, generating kickback revenue for a company called Meridian Medical Solutions, which was registered to an address in Scottsdale that happened to match the summer home where Dr. Caldwell had celebrated his 50th birthday last July according to the LinkedIn photograph he had carelessly left public. It was the kind of detail that would matter to an auditor. Dr. Caldwell had built his fraud with the confidence of a man who believed he was smarter than everyone around him. The hospital's quarterly audit was scheduled for 18 days from now. He had already begun to notice that Megan's charting created problems for his system. Her documentation was so scrupulously accurate that it made the padding obvious by contrast. Where other nurses recorded miscellaneous supplies restocked, Megan recorded 3 trauma shears, size 4.0 endotracheal tubes, quantity 6, 14-gauge peripheral catheters, quantity 12, for fluid bags normal saline 1000 milliliters, quantity 8. Her precision was beautiful and terrible. It was, quite simply, a threat. The overhead page at 11:43 p.m. was his opening move. Megan finished her charting at 11:52 p.m. and moved to Trauma Bay 4, where the new patient would be arriving in approximately 4 minutes according to the radio traffic she had been monitoring for the past 10 minutes. The paramedics were 3 minutes out with a 58-year-old male, chief complaint of chest pain radiating to the left arm, vital signs currently stable but trending toward tachycardia. She pulled the crash cart into position with one smooth motion, the wheels gliding across the tile floor with barely a whisper, and began her pre-arrival checklist. Defibrillator pads positioned on the cart where her hands could find them without looking. Medications arranged in ascending order of administration, epinephrine first, then amiodarone, then atropine. Her fingers moved with the precision of someone who had prepared for emergencies so many times that the motion had become unconscious, muscle memory reaching back through for years at Riverside and 12 years before that in places she no longer discussed. The rain intensified outside, drumming against the reinforced glass with the sound of machine gun fire, and Megan did not flinch at the memory that tried to surface. She pressed it down the way she pressed down everything else, with the efficiency of long practice. There was a patient arriving in 3 minutes. That was the only fact that mattered. But that wasn't the worst part of what was about to begin. At exactly 11:56 p.m., a new arrival diverted to the ER from the Coast Guard station in St. John's. A helicopter crashed during a routine training exercise. No major injuries reported, but one command-level officer requiring immediate evaluation. Dr. Caldwell was already positioned at the front desk, anticipating the arrival with the eagerness of someone who saw opportunity in chaos. More paperwork meant more opportunity for billing irregularities. More complex cases meant more equipment orders. More everything. The ambulance bay doors burst open at 11:59 p.m., and the paramedics wheeled in a patient on a stretcher, his left arm immobilized against his body, his face pale but conscious. The paramedic crew chief rattled off vitals: BP 128/76, heart rate 98, GCS 15, left shoulder subluxation, possible fractured clavicle, and Megan stepped forward to take the stretcher, her hands finding the proper grip points with no thought involved whatsoever. Then she saw the patient's face clearly. Commander Vincent Torres. 44 years old. Master of the Coast Guard station on St. John's. The same officer who had reviewed her son's training credentials 6 months ago during Matthew's qualification cycle for the Maritime Security Response Team. She had seen Torres's photograph on Matthew's dresser in dress blues, had heard her son speak his name with the kind of respect reserved for men who earned it through 18 years of active service and 3 commendations for valor. She did not miss a step. Did not pause. Did not let anything cross her face except professional competence. Bay 4, she said to the paramedics, her voice measured and even. I'll take him from here. She moved with him into the treatment area, positioning the stretcher beside the crash cart, her hands already beginning the assessment before he had fully come to rest. Blood pressure cuff. Pulse oximeter. She worked with the kind of economy of motion that only came from having done this thousands of times, and as she moved, she was aware of Dr. Caldwell entering the bay behind her, aware of his presence like a weight, aware that he was about to say something that would demonstrate, once again, that she was exactly the kind of threat he needed to eliminate. Commander Torres watched her work. His eyes tracked her movements with the precision of a trained observer, and for just a moment, barely longer than a heartbeat, their gazes crossed. She saw something in his expression shift. A flicker of recognition. A question forming. But Megan had already turned back to her instruments, had already begun the process of treating a patient as though every other truth in the room simply did not exist. O'Brien, Dr. Caldwell's voice cut through the bay like a scalpel. My office. Now. She did not turn around. She did not acknowledge the command with anything except continued focus on the patient's oxygen saturation levels, which were reading 96% and stable. 12 years in Special Forces had taught her that obedience to authority figures was a luxury for soldiers. Nurses had other obligations. Just finishing vitals, doctor, she said, her voice carrying the kind of professional courtesy that made it impossible for him to escalate further without looking unreasonable. 1 minute. She documented the readings with meticulous precision. Blood pressure 128/76. Heart rate 98. O2 sat 96. Temperature 98.1. She noted the shoulder subluxation, the clavicle concern, the paramedic's assessment, and then, only then, did she look up at Dr. Caldwell with the face of someone who had absorbed his Nightingale Nora announcement and filed it away in the same compartment where she kept everything else that didn't matter. "Ready when you are, doctor," she said. And the real trouble was just beginning. The supply closet smelled like antiseptic and old cardboard. Metal shelving units pressed close on either side, forcing them into an intimacy that made the air feel thin. Dr. Caldwell's cologne arrived before his words did, something expensive that couldn't mask the sweat underneath. Megan continued counting 4 kits, her fingers moving with the rhythm of someone who had done this 10,000 times. 1, 2, 3. You think your little efficiency crusade makes you special? His voice carried the particular venom of a man watching his control slip. Megan didn't look up. 4, 5. You're a glorified waitress with a stethoscope, cleaning up other people's messes. She marked the clipboard. 63 kits accounted for. Inventory would match perfectly, as it always did. Is there something specific you needed, doctor? What I need is for you to understand your place. He stepped closer. The shelving unit seemed to narrow. This hospital isn't a democracy. It's a hierarchy. And right now, you're threatening to dismantle something I've spent years building. Megan's jaw clenched once, so slight that anyone blinking would have missed it. Her hands remained steady as they returned to the shelves. I document what I observe. You document nothing. His finger jabbed toward her shoulder, stopping just short. You keep your mouth shut, you nod when I speak, and you remember that I can end your career with one phone call. You understand me. She did understand. She understood perfectly. What Dr. Caldwell didn't understand was that she had survived worse than his threats. She had survived Marjah. She had survived carrying 240 pounds of unconscious Commander 4 miles through enemy fire with shrapnel embedded in her own leg. She had survived becoming someone new because the old Megan O'Brien no longer existed outside hospital corridors and darkened apartments. A man with a pharmaceutical kickback scheme and a fragile ego ranked approximately nowhere on the scale of things that actually terrified her. Loud and clear, "Doctor," she said. He waited for trembling. He waited for the voice to crack. He waited for the retreat he had learned to expect from most people when he cornered them in spaces too small for dignity. Instead, she turned and moved past him toward the supply closet door, her shoulder brushing his chest with the casual precision of someone exiting a crowded elevator. By the time he registered what had happened, she was already gone. The next morning, the overhead PA system crackled alive at 6:47 a.m., right at shift change when maximum staff would hear it. Nightingale Nora to ICU. Nightingale Nora to ICU. The page cycled 3 times across the hospital's 3 floors, bleeding through break rooms and patient corridors and the trauma bay where nurses were changing over from night shift. Laughter rippled through the nursing station like a current. Megan heard it. She was charting Commander Torres's vitals at the time, his oxygen stable at 96%, his heart rate steady at 62, his consciousness returning in measured increments. She didn't look up from the EHR screen. Her handwriting remained unchanged, neat, precise, the penmanship of someone trained to document life or death information in the seconds before chaos. 2 nurses glanced at her. A resident smirked. Megan continued charting. For the next 2 days, the nickname appeared in Dr. Caldwell's mouth whenever he passed her in hallways. Nightingale, fetch me a chart. Nightingale, I need those labs expedited. Each use was calibrated for maximum audience exposure. He was assembling a pattern. He was documenting her acceptance of disrespect. In his office, he had already begun creating the paper trail, color-coded folders, highlighted policies, incident reports with her name typed across 17 different complaint forms. The hospital's quarterly audit was scheduled for 4 weeks. Before that date, Megan O'Brien would be gone. But that wasn't the worst part. On the morning of the 3rd day, the entire night shift stood in the ambulance bay preparing equipment for incoming patients. The sun hadn't risen yet. The air carried that specific cold of Portland before dawn, the kind that moved through thin scrubs like water. Megan was restocking the jump bag, her movements economical and precise, when Dr. Caldwell emerged from the hospital entrance with his hands in his pockets. He walked directly toward her. 23 people watched through the ambulance bay windows. "Effective immediately, you're reassigned to patient transport," he announced, his voice pitched loud enough for the entire bay to hear. "Your nursing responsibilities are suspended pending a formal review. Someone needs to move gurneys around this hospital. Might as well be you. Report to logistics at 0800. Megan's hand stilled on the jump bag zipper. Her jaw tightened once. Then she nodded, straightened, adjusted her stethoscope with the same precision she used to check her weapons before patrol, and walked back toward the hospital entrance without speaking. Behind her, she heard the silence that followed, that particular quality of quiet that descends when people witness something they recognize as wrong but don't possess the authority to challenge. She finished her rounds. She charted every vital sign. She walked the hallways with the same bearing she maintained under fire. By the time she clocked out at 0700, the numbness had set in. The numbness was familiar. The numbness was how you survived. Her car waited in the parking lot where it had waited every morning for the past 4 months, a 2008 Honda Civic the color of concrete, parked under the oak tree by the northeast corner because that position offered sight lines to the exits. Old habits. Old training. The driver's seat held the contour of her body now, worn leather that had learned the shape of someone who carried tension in her spine. She sat down. She didn't start the engine. Her hands found the steering wheel and her hands began to grip it, her knuckles pressing down against the black rubber until the skin went white, pale as bone, drained of blood until her fingernails turned the color of old plastic. She stared through the windshield at nothing in particular. At the oak tree's branch that had grown toward the sun. At the parking lot southeast corner where the asphalt was cracking. At the trunk of her car, which she had never fully opened since the night she packed the last of her military belongings. In that trunk, wrapped in a canvas duffel bag, were her combat boots. They were older than her career at Riverside. They were older than her medical discharge. They were older than the decision to stop being Lieutenant Commander Megan O'Brien and start being someone new, someone smaller, quieter, someone who could exist in civilian spaces without causing alarm. The boots bore the scars of 3 tours. The left one had a piece of shrapnel embedded in the heel, from the same IED that had put her on medical discharge. The right one had blood that never fully came clean, just rust-colored stains in the leather crevices. She had tried to throw them away once. She had actually placed them in the donation bag, had carried that bag to the door of her apartment, and then she had turned around and retrieved them at 2 in the morning, gripping them against her chest like they were the only evidence that she had ever been anyone at all. Megan sat in her car for 17 minutes. Her knuckles stayed white. Her breathing remained controlled, the kind of breathing she had learned in basic combatives training, the kind that activated the parasympathetic nervous system and kept adrenaline from flooding her system when her body wanted to fight something. She was fighting the steering wheel. She was fighting the numbness. She was fighting the voice in her head that was starting to sound like the voice from Marjah, the one that said she should have died there instead of becoming this, a woman who counted for kits for a man who was destroying her on purpose. At 6:47 p.m., she started the engine and drove home through Portland traffic without seeing any of it. The numbness held. The numbness was good. The numbness meant she could function. Commander Torres stood at his hospital window on the 6th floor, watching the parking lot below. His oxygen saturation had climbed to 97%. His consciousness had returned in steady increments. The monitors tracked his improvement with their mechanical rhythm, beep, 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 the sound of someone coming back to life. He recognized the woman in the parking lot. He had known immediately, the moment she checked his vitals on the first night, that he was looking at a ghost. People from your past didn't arrive by accident. Especially not when they were supposed to be dead. Marjah had been 9 years ago. 9 years of military funding and classified documentation and the kind of operations that never appeared in official records. 9 years since a convoy had been ambushed in Sanjan Valley. 9 years since a lieutenant commander had carried him through enemy fire on a shattered leg, moving through darkness the way most soldiers moved through daylight, like the desert was her natural habitat and the AK-47 rounds were just inconvenient noise. He had left her there. Not intentionally. The medevac had come for him first. They had separated them in the chaos. By the time he had healed enough to ask questions, she had already disappeared into the VA system and then into something that looked like civilian life. He had tried to find her twice. Both attempts had come back classified. Above his pay grade. Need-to-know basis. But now she was here. Pushing gurneys. Being called Nightingale Nora. Commander Torres picked up his hospital phone and made 2 calls. The first was to his executive officer. The second was to a number he hadn't used since his discharge from the unit, a number that connected to people who lived in the space between official channels and classified operations. He left a message with a single phrase and a location. Angel 6 is operational. Riverside Community Hospital, Portland, Oregon. 23 hours later, vehicles would arrive. Doors would open. The quiet would break like glass. But in this moment, Commander Torres hung up the phone and watched the empty parking lot below, knowing that whatever was about to happen, it would end the way Marjah had ended, with Lieutenant Commander Megan O'Brien saving someone whether they wanted saving or not. The only difference was that this time, the entire hospital was about to learn what they were actually standing next to. 6 days. That was how long Megan pushed gurneys through the corridors of Riverside Community, her hand steady on cold metal rails, her eyes fixed on the linoleum tiles scrolling beneath her feet like a battlefield map she'd already memorized. Patient transport. The institutional graveyard for nurses who didn't belong anymore. The work itself required nothing: move the sick, wheel them from point A to point B, say nothing, exist quietly in the background where no one had to acknowledge her presence. She was good at invisibility. Special forces had taught her to move through spaces like a ghost, and this hospital corridor with its fluorescent hum and antiseptic reek was just another environment to navigate with zero emotional signature. But Dr. Caldwell wasn't finished building his case. On the 2nd floor, in a corner office adjacent to the administrator's suite, he was constructing something far more precise than public mockery. 17 pages of documentation lay spread across his mahogany desk like evidence at a war crimes tribunal. Each page bore his meticulous annotations, highlighted sections in neon yellow, cross-referenced policy numbers handwritten in the margins, dates and times stamped with obsessive precision. Procedural infraction. Scope of practice violation. Unauthorized patient assessment. The phrases accumulated like ammunition in a magazine, waiting to be fired. He had compiled every moment of her competence, reframed each action as an overreach, transformed her efficiency into arrogance. The document package was a work of art in its malice: 17 infractions documented over exactly 6 weeks, each one supported by hospital bylaws sections 4.2.1, 4.2.3, 6.1.4, 6.1.7. He had been studying the termination process with the same intensity a surgeon studies anatomy. By tonight, the documents would be bound in a manila folder with her personnel file attached. By tomorrow morning, she would cease to exist as an employee of Riverside Community Hospital. He had no idea what was about to happen at 8:47 a.m. on the 7th day. The morning rounds began like every other morning, Dr. Caldwell moving through ICU with his entourage of residents and students trailing behind him like disciples, discussing vitals and medication adjustments in the practiced language of people who believed they controlled mortality through sheer force of will. Commander Torres occupied room for 12, his trachea still swollen from the emergency intubation, his ventilator exhaling in rhythmic mechanical breaths that fogged the plastic tubing. His oxygen saturation had been stable at 94% since midnight. His heart rhythm was textbook sinus. By all measures, he was recovering precisely as intended. Dr. Caldwell stood at the foot of his bed for exactly 90 seconds, made a note on the chart, and turned toward the door to continue rounds on the 3rd-floor surgical wing. Megan was wheeling an empty gurney past room for 12 when she heard it, that specific sound, the one that separates routine from crisis. Not a code alarm. Not a rapid response button. Something quieter and infinitely more dangerous, the cascade alarm on the cardiac monitor, a waterfall of beeps descending in pitch and urgency. Her eyes flicked to the monitor screen as she passed. 94% oxygen saturation. 88%. 82. 78. She stopped. The room fell absolutely silent for exactly 2 seconds. No code team rushing past. No residents flooding in. Dr. Caldwell was already 3 rooms down the corridor, his back to her, his attention divided among his audience of students. No one had sounded the alarm yet. The monitoring station at the nurse's desk was understaffed because of budget cuts that no one discussed in meetings. The responsibility for recognizing a crisis had fallen, as it always did, to the person standing closest to it. In this case, a woman pushing a gurney who had already been marked for termination. Megan moved. Not quickly. Not frantically. She moved with the terrifying fluid precision of someone whose muscle memory predated hospitals and nursing licenses, someone whose hands had performed emergency procedures in the dark, in dust storms, while mortars fell like rain on observation posts in Helmand Province. She pushed the gurney into room for 12 and her eyes took in the full clinical picture in the time it took most people to blink. Commander Torres's jugular veins distended like cords beneath the skin of his neck. His chest rose asymmetrically, the right side barely moving while the left heaved in desperate compensation. His lips had turned a dusky shade of blue that no amount of oxygen could fix because the oxygen was never reaching his lungs. His eyes locked onto hers, wide with the specific terror of a drowning man, and Megan recognized what her hands already knew: tension pneumothorax. His trachea had shifted visibly to the left. His right lung had collapsed entirely. The pressure inside his chest was climbing, pushing against his heart, crushing the vessels that fed it. He was dying in real time and he would be dead in minutes if the pressure didn't release. "Step back, O'Brien." Dr. Caldwell's voice came from the doorway, his tone conveying absolute authority and absolute certainty. "Your transport. Let me handle this." Megan's jaw tightened imperceptibly. Her eyes didn't move from the monitor. 75% saturation. Falling. Still falling. The code team was 3 floors away. The crash cart was outside the room. The 14-gauge catheter was in the cart's needle compartment, right where protocol said it should be, right where it would be in exactly 45 seconds too late. She didn't respond to Dr. Caldwell. She simply moved past him, her left shoulder barely brushing his right as she crossed the threshold into the hallway. Her hands found the crash cart. Her fingers located the 14-gauge angiocath needle with the speed of someone who had performed this exact procedure on a battlefield in the dark with only moonlight and muscle memory. She turned and moved back into room for 12. Dr. Caldwell's mouth opened, his voice rising. "What are you? You cannot." Megan already had the needle in her hand. Her other hand was already palpating the second intercostal space on Commander Torres's right side, her fingers finding the exact anatomical landmark, the space between ribs, mid-clavicular line, the precise point where compressed air was desperate to escape. She didn't hesitate. She didn't announce what she was doing. She didn't ask permission from the man in the doorway or the unconscious hierarchy of institutional authority. She simply performed the procedure her hands had learned 17 years ago from a Special Forces combat medic named Garrett Holloway during a field exercise in Fort Campbell, Kentucky. The needle went in. 2 centimeters. Perpendicular to the chest wall. Exactly where it needed to be. And then came the sound that every trauma physician in the world recognizes instantly, the hiss of air escaping. A long, pressurized, accusatory hiss as the pneumothorax released, as the pressure inside the chest cavity vented out through the needle, as physics reasserted itself and allowed a collapsed lung to begin expanding again. The hiss lasted 3 seconds. It filled the room like the exhalation of something wounded and desperate finally finding relief. Commander Torres gasped. His body convulsed once, the involuntary response of a human being who suddenly had oxygen flowing into his lungs again. His saturation climbed. 78 to 82. 82 to 88. The monitor's cascade alarm decelerated, the beep slowing from a frantic waterfall to something almost rhythmic. 92%. 95%. Stable. 30 seconds later, exactly 30 seconds, the code team arrived, their footsteps echoing through the corridor in urgent unison, their awareness triggered by the eventual activation of the cardiac monitor's central station alert that Megan hadn't bothered to sound because she'd already fixed what was broken. They poured into the room with their equipment and their authority and their visible shock at finding the critical situation already managed. The resident who entered first stopped in the doorway, his eyes moving from the patient to the monitor to Megan and back again, his face cycling through the specific sequence of confusion, understanding, and realization that always accompanied witnessing someone else solve a problem that was supposed to require his expertise. Dr. Caldwell was still standing in the doorway. His face had gone white. Then it went red. A very specific shade of red that came from a man watching his institutional power evaporate in real time, watching his careful construction of narrative control dissolve in the face of an action so undeniably correct that no bylaws could obscure it, no policy could condemn it, no amount of professional authority could reframe it as anything other than what it was, someone with knowledge and training making a decision to save a life. "You just assaulted a patient," he said quietly. His voice was shaking. "That's a criminal act." Megan didn't respond. She simply turned and walked back into the corridor, the 14-gauge needle still in her hand because someone needed to dispose of it properly and no one else seemed to be moving. Her composure was absolute. Her breathing was even. Her hands were completely steady. But Dr. Caldwell was done using strategy. By 9:15 a.m., he had filed the incident report. By 10:30 a.m., he had pulled up the hospital's scope of practice bylaws and highlighted every section that technically categorized needle decompression as a physician-only procedure. By noon, he had submitted a formal complaint to the state nursing board. And by 6 p.m., he had completed the termination packet, 17 pages of procedural infractions, each one meticulously cited, each one supported by policy numbers, each one building toward a single inevitable conclusion. He printed the documents, bound them with a brass fastener, and placed them in the folder marked Personnel Action. He had been constructing her termination since the day she arrived. He had simply accelerated the timeline because she had just given him the perfect justification. And that wasn't the worst part. The termination packet sat on Dr. Caldwell's desk like evidence at trial, 17 pages organized with surgical precision. Each sheet highlighted in yellow. Each policy violation cross-referenced in the margins with his own handwriting, neat, deliberate, the penmanship of a man constructing a case he believed was airtight. He had submitted the incident report to hospital administration at 6:47 a.m., filed a formal complaint with the Oregon State Board of Nursing at 7:15 a.m., and scheduled this meeting for 8 a.m. sharp. The timing was calculated. Megan would be exhausted from the night shift. Her defenses would be lowered. Her lawyer, if she even had one, would still be asleep. He looked at her across the desk as she entered his office. She wore the same navy scrubs she'd worn for 6 years, the fabric worn soft at the cuffs. Her hair was pulled back in the same braid. Her posture was the same, shoulders back, weight distributed evenly, the kind of stillness that came from training, not submission. She didn't fidget. She didn't apologize for being there. She simply stood in front of his desk with her hands at her sides and waited. "Please sit," Caldwell said, and she did, the chair receiving her weight without creaking. He opened the packet and began. His voice was professional, almost regretful, the tone of a man doing something difficult but necessary. "Your actions during Commander Torres's medical crisis constituted a serious violation of hospital protocol, scope of practice boundaries, and physician-directed care standards. You performed an invasive procedure without explicit authorization from attending staff. You circumvented the chain of command. You endangered a patient under our care." He tapped the pages with his pen. "This pattern of insubordination extends back 6 weeks. 17 documented incidents. 17 violations of policy, procedure, and professional boundaries." The fluorescent lights overhead cast everything in a clinical glow. Megan's jaw was level. Her breathing was steady. She was not trembling. She was not defending herself. She was simply listening, the way someone listens to a diagnosis they already know is coming. Your dangerous cowboy medicine nearly killed a Coast Guard officer, Caldwell continued, his voice taking on the cadence of someone reading from a script he had perfected. You acted as though you were above hospital hierarchy. Above physician authority. Above the rules that exist to protect patients. He closed the packet. Do you have anything to say? Megan shook her head once. A single, deliberate movement that seemed to confirm every assumption he had made about her, that she was defensive, that she had no defense, that she knew she was guilty. Then this meeting is a formality. Riverside Community Hospital is terminating your employment effective immediately. Your credentials are revoked. Your access is suspended. You are to collect your personal belongings from your locker and vacate the premises within 30 minutes. Security will escort you. He pressed a button on his desk phone. Marcus, we're ready. The security guard appeared in the doorway, Marcus Webb, 62 years old, who had served 2 tours in Afghanistan and who looked at Megan with something that might have been sympathy or might have been resignation. He had seen this before. Competent people cut down by administrators with something to hide. Megan stood. Her movements were economical, controlled, the kind of precise motion that revealed nothing about what she felt. She turned toward the door without looking back at Caldwell, and Marcus fell into step beside her. They walked the corridor together in silence, past the nursing station where staff members pretended not to watch, past the medication room where the afternoon shift was arriving, past the patient rooms where people were living out their medical crises without knowing that the woman who had just been fired had spent 6 years making sure they survived them. When they reached the locker room, Megan opened her locker with a combination she had not forgotten in 6 years. She removed her jacket, the one with the hospital logo faded from washing. She removed her keys. She stared at the pair of worn combat boots on the bottom shelf for 3 seconds. Leather cracked at the toe box. Laces frayed. The sole of the left boot curved inward from years of compensating for a leg that no longer bent the way it once did. She closed the locker without taking them. Marcus drove her to the main entrance in a golf cart, and she walked the rest of the way across the parking lot in the Portland rain, grey and persistent, the kind of rain that seemed like it had always been falling and always would be. Behind her, through the emergency department windows, she could see staff members watching. Orderlies and nurses and techs, all of them frozen in the moment of her departure, all of them understanding that they had just witnessed what happened to people who asked the wrong questions. In the ICU, on the 4th floor, Commander Torres saw her pass by his window. He was still intubated, still sedated, with tubes running from his arms and his throat and his chest. The ventilator breathed for him, a mechanical tide of air in and out, in and out. When he recognized her moving across the parking lot below, something in his damaged nervous system sent a signal to his heart, and his monitor alarm began to scream. Nurses rushed in. His heart rate was 146, climbing toward 150. His blood pressure was rising. His pupils were reactive. He was trying to move against the chemical paralysis that was supposed to keep him still. A resident increased his sedation, and the alarm quieted, and Commander Torres sank back into unconsciousness knowing only that the woman who had saved his life was being removed from the building. 3 days passed like water flowing through a hand, there one moment, gone the next, leaving only the memory of cold. Megan spent those 3 days in her apartment in Northeast Portland, a 2-bedroom place she rented because it was affordable and because it didn't require her to care whether the walls were painted or the floors were clean. She sat on the edge of her bed and stared at her hands. Surgeon's hands, the attending physician had called them once, years ago when she was still training. Steady hands. Hands that could hold lives together. Those same hands had now become unemployed. On the 4th day, she drove to the VA hospital in Northeast Portland because the phantom pain in her left leg, the part of her leg that was no longer there, technically, though the nerve still believed it existed, had become unbearable. She had an appointment for pain management that she had scheduled for months ago and had been dreading ever since. The waiting room was full of men in unit caps. 10th Mountain Division. 82nd Airborne. 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, a dark horse. These were the men who had come home wrong. Men with prosthetics and canes and service dogs trained to sense PTSD episodes before they happened. Men who sat in plastic chairs and filled out forms asking about their service history in boxes labeled branch, deployment dates, rank at discharge, and combat exposure. Megan clutched her intake form and read the questions. The boxes were small, not large enough to contain what Marjah had taken from her. Not large enough to explain that she had carried 17 people through enemy fire, that the last one had been Commander Torres, that she had been shot 3 times and had kept moving. That the shrapnel from the IED that wounded her had lodged so close to her spinal cord that surgeons had decided leaving it there was safer than trying to remove it. That she had been medically discharged at 28 years old and told she was no longer fit to serve. A man in a 10th Mountain cap looked across the waiting room at her. He had the 1,000-yard stare, the one that said he had seen things that the world wasn't supposed to see. He nodded at her with the recognition of someone seeing themselves in another person's eyes. She nodded back, and in that moment, she understood something with perfect clarity. She had become what she once treated. Another broken soldier. Another person who had traded the only world that made sense for a civilian world that would never quite fit. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that the world didn't even know who she was. The hospital HR department runs a routine post-termination background check 3 days after Megan's firing. It's standard procedure, mandatory paperwork, the kind of clerical task that gets filed away with thousands of others. The clerk, a woman named Patricia who has worked at Riverside Community for 14 years, enters Megan O'Brien's name into the federal database at 2:47 p.m. on a Wednesday. What happens next takes 43 seconds. The system flags her file. Not a warning flag. Not a minor alert. A classified security clearance notification that routes automatically to military intelligence databases across 3 federal networks simultaneously. Megan O'Brien is not a regular nurse with a spotty employment record. Megan O'Brien is a registered asset of the United States Special Forces Command. The database ping reaches the Pentagon's Personnel Security Division at 2:48 p.m. By 3:15 p.m., a single phone call has been made from a secure line at Joint Base Lewis McChord to a command center in Washington, D.C. Within 4 hours, the order has been issued. Within 24 hours, everything changes. The black SUVs arrive at Riverside Community Hospital at 6:47 a.m. on a Thursday morning. There are 6 of them. Military grade. The kind of vehicles that don't announce themselves, they simply appear, doors opening in perfect synchronization, boots hitting asphalt with the sound of a marching unit moving as one. The security guard at the front entrance, a man named Carlos who served 2 tours in Helmand Province and recognizes the precision of military movement, freezes. He knows what this is. He knows who they are. A man in a dark suit and tactical boots walks past the reception desk without speaking. His eyes scan the building's layout with the calculating precision of someone assessing a compound. He moves toward administration. The morning shift nurses stop working. Conversations die. The sound of monitors and ventilators suddenly feels very loud in the silence. Dr. Caldwell is in his office reviewing budget reports when the knock comes. Not a courtesy knock. A command knock. 3 sharp raps against his door. He looks up irritated, his expensive pen still hovering over a spreadsheet showing the 17.4% profit margin he's built through equipment inflation and billing code manipulation. The door opens without waiting for permission. A Special Forces operator enters. He's 6'2", carrying himself with the kind of physical authority that makes the air pressure change. His uniform is dress blues with a Black Ops patch, 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, Night Stalkers. He doesn't introduce himself. He doesn't need to. He steps forward and speaks one word, delivered with the tone of someone reading a death sentence, Valkyrie. Dr. Caldwell's pen stops moving. What? The operator doesn't answer. He simply steps aside. What happens next moves with the precision of a military operation that has been planned for exactly this moment. The hallway outside Dr. Caldwell's office fills with people. Hospital staff. Security. And then something else. A woman's voice, Carlos, the veteran security guard, cuts through the silence with a command that hasn't been used in decades in a civilian hospital, Lieutenant Commander on deck. Every person in the corridor snaps to attention. Nurses. Custodians. Orderlies. The reflex is bone deep, muscle memory responding to a rank structure that transcends civilian hierarchy. They know. The moment those words echo through the hall, they know this is serious. A 2-star general enters the hallway. Brigadier General Margaret Holloway. Her uniform carries 2 stars and a chest full of medals that speak of 28 years of service. Behind her walk 3 officers, a Navy captain, an Army colonel, and someone in unmarked fatigues who doesn't need a name because his presence alone commands respect. General Holloway's eyes find Dr. Caldwell standing in his office doorway, and she begins to speak. Her voice carries the weight of institutional authority backed by the full power of the Department of Defense. I'm reading a personnel file. Discharged service member. 14 years of active duty. 3 combat tours. 2 Bronze Stars for valor. She pauses. Each medal hangs in the air like a verdict. Purple Heart. Another pause. The silence is so thick you could operate in it. And 17 confirmed combat saves. Combat saves, Dr. Caldwell. 17 lives saved in direct fire situations. Dr. Caldwell's face drains of color like someone has opened a drain in his chest and his confidence is bleeding out onto the tile floor. General, there were protocol violations. She performed an unauthorized. She performed battlefield medicine. General Holloway cuts him off with the precision of a surgical strike. Her voice doesn't rise. It doesn't need to. She performed the exact same procedure that's taught in every trauma surgery fellowship in this country. She saved Commander Torres's life. For the 2nd time. The last 4 words hit like a percussion shock. 2nd time. That word echoes through the hallway. That word changes everything. Commander Torres, who has been extubated for 6 days and is being wheeled through the corridor on a gurney by 2 hospital orderlies, speaks from his bed with the voice of someone who has been waiting to tell this story. Marjah, 2010. Sanjan Valley. Our convoy was ambushed. IED detonated 30 meters from my position. I was hit. Bleeding out. O'Brien, Lieutenant Commander O'Brien, she carried me. His voice cracks slightly. Not from weakness. From the weight of remembering what she did. For miles. Through active fire. Through terrain that should have killed us both. She got me to the Phi Base medical tent. She saved my life. He pauses. His jaw clenches. I didn't know her name was taken off the honor roll. I didn't know she was fired. But I knew the moment I saw her in this hospital that I was looking at a hero who had stopped being allowed to be one. General Holloway turns to Dr. Caldwell. Her expression doesn't change. Her tone doesn't change. But the words that come out carry the weight of military justice, absolute and final. Dr. Caldwell, you are terminated from your employment at Riverside Community Hospital effective immediately. Your hospital credentials are hereby stripped. Military police will escort you from this facility. She signals with one hand. Not a dramatic gesture. A simple, economical movement. Within 30 seconds, 2 military police officers in dress uniform appear. They don't touch him. They don't need to. They simply position themselves on either side and begin walking. Dr. Caldwell's legs move because they have to, because the human body responds to proximity and implied threat even when the conscious mind is in shock. The parking lot is waiting with television cameras already in position. Local news has been tipped. The images of Dr. Caldwell being escorted by military police spread across 3 stations before lunch. His hospital ID badge is removed from his neck by a security officer. His access codes are deleted from the system. His office is sealed. Federal auditors arrive that same afternoon with boxes and warrants. The financial records tell the story that Caldwell's carefully maintained facade has been hiding $340,000 in fraudulent billing over 18 months. Meridian Medical Supply inflated equipment costs. Unnecessary device orders routed through shell corporations. Inflated audit reports signed with his name. The charges will take months to formalize, but the federal investigators already know exactly what they're looking at. White-collar fraud. Healthcare billing conspiracy. Retaliatory employment termination. The nursing board complaint against Megan is withdrawn before dinner. The state medical board opens an investigation into Caldwell's pattern of terminations, for other nurses come forward with documentation of identical retaliation schemes. His medical license is suspended pending review. The internet knows his name by 8 p.m. Megan learns about it from a phone call from the hospital's new interim director at 9:30 that morning. She's sitting in her apartment when her phone rings. She doesn't recognize the number but answers anyway, the discipline of her training making her pick up on the first ring. The director's voice is trembling. "Ms. O'Brien, Lieutenant Commander. I want to apologize. Personally. What happened here was unconscionable. We would like to discuss bringing you back to a position appropriate to your experience. Please." The word please comes out like a plea. Megan listens to the offer without speaking. A position as ER clinical director. A salary that's 50% higher than what she was making as a floor nurse. A formal apology. Recognition. Everything that should have been hers from the beginning, offered now with the desperation of an institution that has realized what it destroyed. She sets the phone down and opens her laptop. The news articles are already there. Dr. Caldwell's face. The military police escort. Federal investigators. The words keep repeating: fraud, retaliation, corruption. She reads the details without emotion, the way someone reads a mission brief. Facts. Data points. Information. There's no triumph in it. No satisfaction. Just the understanding that the system has corrected itself because the system recognized what she actually was. The system knows she matters. That's what the uniforms and generals represented. Not justice. Acknowledgement. 6 months later, Megan stands in the newly renamed O'Brien Emergency Medicine Wing at Riverside Community Hospital. The plaque beside the entrance reads, "Dedicated to Lieutenant Commander Megan O'Brien, Purple Heart, United States Special Forces Command, in recognition of service to medicine and country." She's wearing her white coat. Below it, her scrubs are navy blue. Behind her desk, the clinical director's office, is a glass case mounted on the wall. Inside the case are her combat boots. The leather is still worn. The laces are still frayed. But underneath the boots is a brass placard engraved with her name, her rank, her medals, and the single line, Marjah, 2010. Semper Vigilans. Always watching. The boots are home now. 12 new trauma nurses sit in the simulation lab watching her demonstrate chest tube placement. Her hands move with the precision of someone who has done this under fire. "Identify the 4th or 5th intercostal space," she says, her voice steady and educational. "Insert the tube at the mid-axillary line. You're aiming for the pleural space, not the cardiac chamber. Hesitation kills patients. Certainty saves lives." One of the nurses raises her hand. Were you really in combat?" Megan pauses. She looks at the young woman. 23 years old maybe. Earnest. Scared. Trying to understand how someone learns to do this under conditions most humans can't imagine. "I was," Megan says simply. "And I learned that medicine and combat aren't that different. Both demand speed, precision, and the willingness to act when action is required. Everything else is just training." Through the office window, the dedication ceremony unfolds in the hospital courtyard. 200 people have gathered. Hospital staff. Veterans. Local officials. and military. Her son stands in his Coast Guard dress uniform beside Commander Torres. Both are saluting as the new emergency medicine wing flag is raised. The flag carries the hospital's logo on one side and a medical corps emblem on the other. Megan watches her son's face, 18 years old, finally understanding what his mother actually was. What she sacrificed. What she endured. He's been stationed with Commander Torres for the past 2 months, and they've become close. Not just superior and subordinate. Friends. The kind of bond that forms between people who understand the weight of what it means to serve. The dedication speech is brief. The hospital's new director, a competent physician named Dr. Sarah Chen, talks about institutional accountability and the importance of protecting professionals who perform their duties with integrity. She speaks about Megan's medical competence and her ethical clarity. She doesn't need to mention Dr. Caldwell. Everyone knows what happened. Everyone knows why the wing was renamed. Everyone knows that the quietest person in the room is often the one holding it all together, and when you finally realize who you've been standing next to, you either step up or step away. Dr. Caldwell drives a medical supply van for Rural Health Associates now. Eastern Oregon. Small clinics. Rural populations without the resources to demand much. He makes $19 an hour. No benefits. No pension. No path back to medicine. The state medical board rejected his reinstatement petition twice. The federal case is still building. He makes deliveries of the same overpriced equipment he used to order fraudulently, now understanding the full circle of his own manipulation. Every box he carries is another reminder of what he destroyed. That night, Megan sits in her car in the VA hospital parking lot. She's driven past here hundreds of times since being fired. She hasn't stopped until now. Through the glass doors, she can see the waiting room where she sat 3 days after losing everything. Veterans in unit caps and service jackets. Intake forms with boxes too small to contain what war took from them. She could be one of them still. Instead, she's training the next generation of trauma nurses. She's wearing her rank again. She's home. She reaches into the trunk where the combat boots used to sit. Empty now. The space is clean. Available. Ready for something new. She closes the trunk slowly and drives toward home, knowing finally that she doesn't have to hide who she is anymore. The world knows. The military knows. The hospital knows. And most importantly, she knows. She's a nurse. She's a hero. She's Lieutenant Commander Megan O'Brien, and she's no longer apologizing for either. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been underestimated and proven them wrong, please like, subscribe, and share this video. Tell us in the comments, have you ever judged someone only to find out you were dead wrong? And if you did, what made you realize it?